Today, we lift the lid on what's really going on. Welcome to Unboxed, where nothing stays sealed. Toxicity isn't always shouting in the hallway. Sometimes it's the quiet sabotage that drives your highest performers away. Today, our guest is Mrs. Mabu Nteta, the Managing Director of SBC. With her expertise in organizational transformation, she's going to be helping us shed light on and unbox this issue of toxicity in the workplace. Welcome, Mrs. Nteta, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Kgosi. I was just listening to the intro there and just wondering about, toxicity in the workplace and thinking about how it's come to the workplace. Whereas when we talk about toxic things, my understanding is that you're talking about things that are in the lab. I think that word actually emanates from something scientific.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure, but as I think about it, I'm like, wow, this word has found its way into organizations, whereas it really should have stayed there in the labs with science.
With science.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's very important, which leads me to the first question of how do we then define toxicity in the workplace?
I think in the context of culture, in the context of teams and ways of work and, all things organizational performance, informal structure, etc., I would again go back to that scientific definition, which really speaks to something that is unwanted, something that is harmful, something that is almost poisonous, right? And when something is toxic, it causes harm. And I think it could also cause death, right? When it's toxic, because poison can cause death.
Exactly.
But let me bring it in, to the organizational space and how teams work amongst each other, and even how leaders lead, isn't it? Because I don't think it's really about a specific level in the organization.
Yeah.
I think that when we say there's toxicity in a team, is we speaking to the harmful behaviors that have found themselves showing up in a team or in an organization or amongst a leadership or an affinity within the organization.
Yes.
So it speaks really to behaviors, to attitudes, right? To dispositions, to actions that cause harm, when really in the workplace, we want behaviors that show up, that contribute positively to a great culture and a great place to work, where people wake up in the morning, feeling all charged up to go to work. When the environment is toxic, or when a team member exhibits toxic behavior, we then say they are showing up as harmful to the team. And you can imagine, as soon as you're harmful to the team and to the organization, you are harmful to impact and results, right?
Yeah.
And who wants to jeopardize impact and results? Because that's the reason why organizations exist. So simply put, without looking at necessarily an Oxford dictionary definition, I'd say it's just causing harm.
It's causing harm.
Yeah, it's causing harm to a team situation, to an organizational situation, and really not breathing life into the values of the organization. That's how I would put it.
And you know what? I agree, actually. And, it's very interesting that you say poison, and causing death, right? Because so often we speak to high performance in our organizations and we speak to all these growth targets and our vision and our mission. But as soon as toxicity creeps in, we find that suddenly those visions are becoming impossible. They're getting clouded by this toxicity. And, that then brings me into, how sometimes it's quite difficult to pinpoint. I'd like for you to just help me understand what the difference between toxic behavior, right? Truly toxic behavior, and something which we'd like to call, maybe a difficult employee or an employee that might just be like that normally.
So I often hear people say, I was born like that. Right? And I often hear people say, well, we have this colleague, his name is Kgosi, he doesn't show up in the way that we expect him to, particularly like early hours of the morning. He just wants to be left alone.
Yeah.
But he's just like that. That is his personality. And you will also hear other descriptions of this team member who, is not really used to work in a team environment. They like to work alone, or they don't like to have joint objectives because they perform better when they work alone. And I'm listening, I'm like, that sounds like there's some toxic behavior in this team. So yes, there are, I would say, difficult personalities, but in the context of what we're talking about today, toxic behavior sometimes is clothed, right? It's disguised. It's what they call couvert in French, which means it's somebody knowing that they are toxic themselves and the team also knowing they're toxic and almost accepting that behavior. If it's a behavioral problem, we can address it through, the kind of support that organizations give, whether, it's psychotherapy, whether it's one-on-ones, you know what I'm saying, having conversations around their developmental areas, and also, listening to what it is that, makes them tick and not make them tick. And we can get to maybe the personality issues or the difficult aspects of someone's character and personality.
Yes.
But today, we are unboxing toxicity. Toxic behavior is toxic behavior. You can disguise it as much as you want. But somebody who comes in and we know that they are the ones that are going to lead in all things gossip. We know that they are the ones that will talk about others behind their backs. They will highlight issues and make it like it's a big organizational issue, right? You will ask a toxic person, if you can help with whatever it is that they are complaining about or whoever it is they are talking about. And you ask them, can we help fix this, right? And they will say to you, well, I was just telling you, I didn't mean for it to be an issue. Why are you avoiding resolution, right? It is important for us to call out toxicity for what it is. And once somebody comes in with that toxic behavior, harmful behavior, and we accept, right, that we are not going to solution around it, it means even us as leaders, we are condoning toxicity.
Yes.
Toxicity also can convert to actually bullying. You understand? Because some people, we say we must all have shock absorbers. We must all take, things in, not take things personally, but some things really hit hard when you have a rude person in the team. And as I said, you have one who goes behind the team's back, who is always backstabbing, who's gossiping, who's escalating unnecessarily without having, resolved issues at first. That is toxic behavior. And that hits at our core values. And we have them on walls and talk about how great we are as teams. And we look good from the outside because these days we can brand very well, right? But on the inside, there are people who just don't want to come to work anymore. They just don't have a choice.
The rotten apples.
The rotten apples. And what do they do as well? What do they do, rotten apples?
They rot the other veggies.
They rot the others. So we're busy enrolling people in toxicity.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That is something we must unbox in our organization and put a stop to.
I see. And that's so interesting. And I really like that, the rotten apple analogy, because it really does show that this person comes into the office with the intention of destruction, right? They intend to take away from and kill the core values of the organization, and that then leads me to the last question of how then do we deal with these toxic behaviors or these toxic characters? Or is firing them the only solution that we have?
Well, you know what? I mean, I talk about calling out toxicity for what it is, right? We know when it's toxic. we know when it's harmful to the team. So the first thing that we just need to do is have a mindset shift. Let's not disguise it. Let's not protect it. I also want to, just speak to my journey as well in culture and transformation and working with people and say that I don't think anyone was born toxic. I think we were all really born equal in the eyes of whoever it is you believe made you, right? But when we then have experiences or we encounter situations or we have experienced, right, toxicity ourselves, sometimes you find it's because somebody's projecting.
Yeah.
It's projecting. And what we call the RCA, the root cause analysis of behaviors, is also important because we can't just say that person is just like that, they're toxic, let's fire them. No, we know that we have a responsibility for growth. We have a responsibility for development. But before we intervene with a solution, with an intervention, we do need to perhaps do that root cause analysis to understand what is causing that toxicity. And as I said, it could be projection. This person has experienced it before and they are now projecting on others. I think I've found as well, working with different organizations that the tone is also set at the top. And, as a leader, I'll be the first to admit that if we don't do a root cause analysis of the things that affect and impact our actions in the workplace, we may find that we, one, condone, right, a toxic culture, or we are oblivious to it, or we are in denial of it. We do need to get in touch with, first of all, ourselves in terms of our own leadership style and the impact that we have on the culture. But we also need to do your, know your team, your team. KYT, right? Know your team and understand what it is that, motivates one. What is it that maybe one is going through as well, and attempt as well to walk with them, on their journey of growth. And maybe those who allow you also to go back in time to things that may have impacted them. I think we also need to seek therapy as teams, seek therapy as individuals within teams. And as a leader, it's our responsibility, because otherwise that ripple effect is going to happen. You'll have that one rotten apple, as you said, which then just causes, the culture to show up in the way that is not going to get us the impact and the results that we have. And that ripple effect, by the way, in the opposite is true. If you have a non-toxic environment, you positively impact. So catch people also doing right, and offer them that feedback that they are doing right. That's also just as infectious as a negative culture or a toxic behavior. So we want to avoid having a poisonous or harmful informal culture. You're always going to have an informal culture, which sort of is neck on neck sometimes with the formal structure, right? But we need to make it a healthy one. There's nothing wrong with you, having your coffee there with a colleague and, chatting about things that are not necessarily about work, as long as they are not harmful to work. So there are ways of, going around this and avoiding things like firing. Because when you fire, what do? You let them out into the universe. You let them out to another organization as well. And guess what? It just becomes
poisonous
a vicious cycle. Then we have a poisoned country and a poisoned world.
That's very, very true. And thank you for that. And, I really like that last point that you made, that, if you do not attempt to rehabilitate, you're only perpetuating the problem. You're only sending it to someone else, and they're going to say that you're transferring a problem, So why not be the pioneer and be the one that solved the problem, right? And know that you helped someone go on a journey of transformation.
Right.
So thank you so much, Mrs. Nteta, on all your insights today. I think we've really unboxed this toxicity issue, although we know that it does go deep, right? And we could sit here for weeks speaking about it, literally, right? But thank you so much for your insights. Do you have any closing words for us? Any words of wisdom?
Well, I would say that culture, right? is not created, as sometimes we say, let's create a great culture. I do believe that culture shows up. And it shows up in what we say and what we don't say. It shows up in what we accept and don't accept. It shows up in how we walk, right, with one another in the organization to breathe life into our values, and also reward those that are breathing, life into those values. It's not a simple formula, but it's really, really about everybody self-monitoring and saying, I want to show up in the most positive way so that the ripple effect is a positive one, so that the apple is the crunchy, healthy one. You know what I'm saying? Never a perfect work environment, but definitely we cannot condone toxic work environments and toxic team members. I would say that would be my last word.
All right. Thank you so much for your nuggets of wisdom, and we're looking forward to having you on Unboxed again.
Thank you very much.
At SBC, we offer a wide range of products and services, such as change management, organizational culture change, team leadership, and customer experience training, and many more. You can reach out to us on the platforms that are shown on screen.